Arnold Schwarzenegger slammed his elbow down on the table and locked eyes with Sylvester Stallone, their hands crashing together with a grip that turned both men's knuckles white. Neither arm moved an inch, but the table beneath them groaned, splintered, and gave way before either man did. What happened in the next 60 seconds would become Hollywood legend, a story whispered about for decades. What happened in the next 45 minutes would become Hollywood legend, a story whispered about for decades in gyms, on movie sets, and in the back rooms of every restaurant on Sunset Boulevard where two egos ever squared off over anything. But before I tell you what went down between these two monsters, you need to understand something. This wasn't planned. Nobody sent out invitations. Nobody called a promoter. This was two guys who couldn't stand each other ending up in the same room at the same time, and neither one of them had the good sense to walk away. We're talking mid-1970s. Arnold Schwarzenegger had just won his 6th Mr. Olympia title. The man was 235 pounds of Austrian granite walking around Los Angeles like he owned the city. And honestly, in certain circles he did. Stallone was different. Sly hadn't blown up yet. Rocky was still being written. He was a scrappy actor from Hell's Kitchen doing bit parts and getting doors closed in his face. But the thing about Stallone, and believe me, this matters, the guy trained like a man trying to outrun his own shadow. He wasn't bodybuilder big. He was boxer strong, wiry, thick forearms, grip strength that came from desperation, not vanity. They met at a party in Santa Monica, not a Hollywood party with crystal and champagne. This was a gathering at the home of a mutual friend in the fitness world, a guy who trained stuntmen and martial artists out of a warehouse gym near the beach. The kind of place where the floors were concrete and the weights didn't match. Folding chairs, a keg in the corner, maybe 30 people, most of them built like they could flip a car. Arnold walked in first. He was wearing a tight black shirt, and if you think he wasn't aware of the effect that had on a room, you didn't know Arnold. The man was a performer to his core. Every entrance was a show. He shook hands, he laughed louder than anyone. He stood in the center of every conversation circle and expanded until there was no room for anyone else. That was his game. Dominance through presence. He didn't need to fight you. He just needed to make you feel smaller. Stallone showed up about an hour later. Get this. He almost didn't come. He'd been writing all day, scribbling notes for what would eventually become the script that changed his life. His hands were cramped. His neck was stiff. A friend had to drag him out the door. But he walked into that room and the first thing he saw was Arnold, shirtless now because someone had challenged him to flex, surrounded by a crowd clapping and cheering like it was a damn circus. Stallone's jaw tightened. He grabbed a beer from the counter and leaned against the far wall. Now here's what nobody tells you. These two had met before, briefly, at a gym in Venice. Arnold had looked Stallone up and down and said, "You're an actor? What have you been in?" Not mean exactly, but with that Austrian accent and that half grin, it landed like a backhand. Stallone had mumbled something about a few small roles and walked away feeling about 2 inches tall. He didn't forget that feeling. Not for a day. So here they are, same party, same room, and the temperature between them is already running hot before a single word gets exchanged. Arnold is holding court near a fold-out table that someone had set up for food. Plates of cold cuts and bread, nothing fancy. He's telling a story about lifting, always about lifting, and he's got his elbow on the table, demonstrating something, maybe a curl technique, maybe just posing, and somebody shouts out, "Who here could beat Arnold in an arm wrestle?" The room laughed. Arnold laughed loudest of all. He held up his right arm, made a fist, flexed his bicep, and the thing looked like a mountain with a vein running through it. "Nobody in this room," he said, "nobody in this city." Stallone took a sip of his beer and didn't move, but his eyes were locked on Arnold's arm. A guy near the keg, a stuntman named Rick who worked on disaster movies, nudged Stallone. "You should go up there." Stallone shook his head. "I'm not a circus act." Rick leaned in closer. "Yeah, but you've been arm wrestling guys at Gold's all month. You took down Big Danny last week." Stallone said nothing, but he set his beer down on the counter. That was the first move. I swear this happened. The simple act of putting down a drink changed the entire trajectory of the night. Arnold was still talking. He was always still talking. He pointed at a guy across the room, a bodybuilder with arms the size of Stallone's thighs. "You want to try? Come, sit down." The bodybuilder laughed and waved him off. Arnold spread his hands wide. "See? They all know. Nobody wants this." Stallone pushed off the wall. He walked across the room, not fast, not slow, just steady. The crowd parted for him, not because they knew who he was, but because something about the way he moved made people step aside. He pulled out the folding chair across from Arnold and sat down. Arnold looked at him, that half grin again. "The actor," he said. Stallone put his elbow on the table. "Now listen to me. You have to understand the physics of what was about to happen." Arnold's arm was massive. His bicep measured 22 inches at its peak. His forearm was thick as a fence post. He had won arm wrestling matches against professional strongmen just for fun. Stallone's arm was different. Smaller in circumference, sure, but dense, corded. The kind of arm that belonged to a guy who hit heavy bags for hours and did pull-ups until his palms bled. This was not a mismatch. This was two completely different kinds of strength about to collide. Arnold wrapped his hand around Stallone's. Their fingers interlocked. A guy standing near them, accounts differ on who, put his hand over both of theirs to set the grip. Arnold was still grinning. Stallone was not. His face was blank, stone. The only movement was a small muscle twitching in his neck. Someone counted down. 3, 2, 1, go. Here's the thing about arm wrestling at this level. It doesn't start with the arm, it starts with the hand. The first battle is the grip. Whoever controls the wrist angle controls the leverage. Arnold immediately tried to roll his wrist over the top, a classic power move, using his larger hand to bend Stallone's wrist backward and take away his pulling power. Stallone countered by curling his fingers inward and locking his wrist straight. He didn't try to overpower Arnold's roll, he just refused to give an inch. For the first 5 seconds, neither arm moved, not a centimeter. The room went quiet. 30 people stood around that folding table, holding their breath, watching two arms tremble against each other like cables about to snap. Then Arnold pushed, hard. He threw his shoulder into it, technically a foul in competitive arm wrestling, but nobody here was calling fouls. Stallone's arm dipped about 15 degrees to the right. The crowd gasped. Arnold's grin widened. He pushed harder, 20 degrees, 25. Stallone's knuckles were heading toward the table surface, but Stallone's feet shifted. Under the table where nobody could see, he planted his left foot against the table leg and braced himself. His entire body became an anchor, and at about 30 degrees from losing, his arm stopped moving. Just stopped. Dead. Arnold pushed and pushed. Nothing happened. The grin was gone now. His face was reddening, his neck swelling, and his arm was shaking with effort. But Stallone had turned into concrete. He wasn't winning, but he absolutely was not losing. Now this is where it gets wild. Believe me when I tell you this. They held that position, Arnold pressing, Stallone holding, for what witnesses later described as somewhere between 30 seconds and a full minute. In arm wrestling, that's an eternity. Your muscles flood with lactic acid. Your tendons start screaming. Every second feels like holding a car door open against a hurricane. Arnold spoke first, through clenched teeth. "You're strong, stronger than you look." Stallone didn't answer. He didn't need to. His body was doing all the talking. His forearm was swelling with blood, veins popping up like road maps across his skin. His grip hadn't loosened. His wrist hadn't turned. He was surviving, and in a fight like this, survival is a weapon. Then Stallone began to pull back. Slowly, degree by degree. 25 became 20, 20 became 15. The crowd started making noise again. Someone shouted, "Holy hell!" Arnold's eyes widened. For maybe the first time that night, the showman was gone and the competitor was fully present. He reset his feet, squared his shoulders, and bore down with everything he had. Their arms returned to center, dead even, both of them shaking, both of them breathing hard, sweat running down Arnold's forehead and dripping onto the table between them. Stallone's lip was curled up on one side, not a smile, more of a snarl. The look of an animal backed into a corner who has decided that the corner is exactly where he wants to be. The table started to creak. No kidding. This was a standard folding table, the kind you buy at a hardware store for $20. It was never built for this. Two men generating hundreds of pounds of lateral force through a single point of contact, and the surface was starting to bow. The legs wobbled. Someone reached out to steady it. Rick, the stuntman, put both hands on the edge and pressed down, trying to keep the battlefield intact. It didn't help. Arnold made his move. He shifted his grip. A subtle thing, barely visible, but what he was doing was moving the point of contact from his fingers to his palm, trying to get a mechanical advantage. It was a veteran technique, something competitive arm wrestlers call a hook. He pulled his elbow back slightly, changed the angle of force from lateral to downward, and threw every ounce of power he had into one explosive push. Stallone's arm went down, 45 degrees, 60. The back of his hand was 6 inches from the table. The crowd erupted. Arnold roared. And then, right at the edge of defeat, Stallone did something incredible. He didn't fight the angle, he accepted it. He let Arnold's force carry his hand down and to the right, and then he redirected. Instead of pushing straight back up, which would have been impossible against Arnold's mass, he pulled laterally across his own body, dragging the match into a position where his forearm strength mattered more than Arnold's bicep. It was instinct, pure street fighting applied to a table sport. His hand stopped 2 inches from the surface. Arnold was fully extended, all his weight committed to a downward push that was no longer going where he aimed it. And Stallone, from the absolute edge of losing, began to climb back. The table groaned. Not a creak this time. A groan. The metal legs on Arnold's side buckled inward, bending under the diagonal stress. The surface tilted about 5 degrees toward Arnold. Rick jumped back. Someone shouted to stop. Neither man stopped. You need to hear what happened next because this is the part that every version of this story agrees on. Their arms came back to center. Dead vertical, both men were gasping. Arnold's shirt, well, he didn't have one, but his chest was heaving so hard you could count every rib between those massive pecs. Stallone's shirt was soaked through. His free hand was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. Arnold spoke again. "You don't quit." Stallone finally spoke. "I don't know how." I want you to sit with that for a second, because that line tells you everything about who Sylvester Stallone was before the world knew his name. This was a man who had slept in bus stations, who had sold his dog because he couldn't afford food, who would, within a year, turn down hundreds of thousands of dollars because he insisted on starring in his own script. The same stubbornness that kept his hand off that table would build one of the biggest careers in movie history. But right now, at this table, none of that existed yet. He was just a guy who refused to lose. Arnold reset. He took a breath, rolled his shoulders as much as the locked grip allowed, and prepared for another assault. But something had changed. His forearm was cramping. You could see it. Small, involuntary twitches running through the muscle, the kind that happen when your body is running out of fuel. Arnold had more mass, but mass requires more oxygen, more blood, more energy to sustain. In a sprint, he was the favorite. In a war of attrition, the math started to shift. Stallone saw the twitch, and for the first time he pressed forward. Not hard, not explosive, steady, constant. The kind of force that doesn't let up, doesn't surge, just keeps coming. Arnold's arm tipped 5 degrees left, then 10. Arnold dug in, fought back, recovered a few degrees. But the overall trend was moving in one direction, and everyone in the room could see it. The table had had enough. The leg on Arnold's side, the one that had buckled earlier, folded completely. The table dropped, the surface tilted at a 40-degree angle, and both men lurched forward. Their locked hands slammed against the collapsing surface, and the impact drove the opposite legs outward. The whole thing folded in on itself. Cold cuts flew. Paper plates scattered across the concrete floor. A bottle of mustard hit the ground and exploded in a yellow streak across someone's shoes. Here's the thing that kills me about this moment. Neither man let go. The table collapsed around them, and their hands stayed locked. They were both on their feet now, pulled forward by the fall, leaning across the wreckage of a destroyed table, still gripping each other, still pushing. Arnold was laughing, not the big show-off laugh from earlier, a real laugh, raw, surprised. Stallone wasn't laughing, but the snarl had softened into something else, not quite a grin, more of an acknowledgement. The look of a man who just realized his opponent is worthy of the fight. Someone finally stepped between them. Rick, the stuntman, put his arms across both their chests and pushed them apart. "You two are going to break my friend's house," he said. Other hands appeared, people pulling them back, separating their grip finger by finger. Arnold stood up straight. He looked at his hand. His palm was red and already showing the early signs of a blister across the base of his fingers. He flexed his forearm and winced. Then he looked at Stallone. "What is your name again?" Stallone told him. Arnold nodded slowly. "I will remember that. Now look, let me tell you what didn't happen. There was no clear winner. No hand touched the table in the official sense because the table ceased to exist before the match could end. Every person in that room will give you a different answer about who was winning when it fell apart. Arnold's guys say Arnold had it locked. Stallone's guys say the momentum had shifted. The truth, as far as I can piece it together from multiple accounts over multiple decades, is this. Arnold was stronger at the start, Stallone was stronger at the end, and the table was the only definitive loser. But the real story isn't about who won. Trust me on this. The real story is about what happened after. Arnold grabbed 2 beers. He walked over to Stallone, who was sitting on a folding chair, flexing his hand open and closed. Arnold handed him one of the beers. Stallone looked up at him. Arnold pulled a chair over, turned it backward, and sat down across from him. "Where do you train?" Arnold asked. "Everywhere. Gold sometimes, my apartment mostly." "Your apartment?" "I have a heavy bag on a chain in my living room. My landlord hates me." Arnold took a long drink. Then he said something that, by all accounts, nobody in that room expected. "You know, when I first came to this country, I trained in a basement. Cold, dark. The weights were rusted. I thought I would never get out of that basement." Stallone looked at him, waiting. "But the basement is where you build what nobody can take from you," Arnold said. This was not the Arnold the world knew, not the showman, not the guy who flexed for crowds and declared himself the greatest. This was a 28-year-old immigrant from a small town in Austria who remembered what hunger felt like. And for just a moment, sitting across from another hungry man, the mask dropped. Stallone raised his beer. Arnold raised his. They drank. Over the next hour, they talked about training, about the movie business, about the walls that Hollywood put up around guys who looked like them. Arnold had been told his body was too big for film, his accent too thick, his name too foreign. Stallone had been told he looked too rough, talked too slow, and should be happy with the scraps he was getting. Both of them had been told no so many times that the word had lost all meaning. They didn't become best friends that night. That's not how either of them worked. They became something more useful. Rivals, the kind of rivals who sharpen each other, the kind who look across a room and think, "That guy is coming for what I want, so I better be better tomorrow than I am today." Within 2 years, everything changed. Rocky came out in 1976, and Stallone went from nobody to the biggest star on the planet overnight. Arnold saw that and pushed harder. He mapped out his own path from bodybuilding to acting with the precision of a military campaign. When Conan the Barbarian hit in 1982, followed by The Terminator in 1984, the race was on for real. For the next decade, they tried to destroy each other at the box office. Every movie was a shot fired. Rambo versus Commando. Rocky IV versus Predator. They tracked each other's grosses. They fought over scripts. They negotiated kill counts. Literally, both of them demanded their characters have more on-screen kills than the other. The competition was relentless, petty, personal, and the fuel that drove both of them to the top of the mountain. And it started at a folding table in Santa Monica that never stood a chance. Look, I need to tell you something else, because this story has a second act that most people don't know about. Decades later, in the early 2000s, Arnold and Stallone were at an event together. They were older now. Arnold had been governor of California. Stallone had done more sequels than anyone could count. The fire between them had cooled from a blaze to something warmer. They were sitting at a dinner table, a much sturdier one this time, at a charity event. Someone at the table, a young producer who didn't know any better, asked, "Is it true you guys once arm wrestled and broke a table?" Arnold looked at Stallone. Stallone looked at Arnold. Arnold put his elbow on the table. Stallone shook his head. "Not again." Arnold grinned. "What, you are afraid now? You are old now?" "We're both old. Speak for yourself." Stallone put his elbow on the table. The people around them started buzzing. Phones came out. The young producer looked like he might faint. A waiter carrying a tray of desserts stopped dead in his tracks. They gripped hands. Arnold counted down. 3, 2, 1, go, and nothing happened. They held each other at center, arms locked, not pushing, not pulling, just holding. Arnold started laughing. Stallone started laughing. They shook hands at center, still gripped, and Arnold used his free hand to pat Stallone on the shoulder. "You know," Arnold said, "I think the table won last time." "The table always wins," Stallone said. They let go. The table survived. The crowd applauded without fully understanding what they had just witnessed. What they'd seen was 2 warriors who had spent their lives trying to beat each other, deciding in a single quiet moment that the fight itself was the thing that mattered, not the result, the fight. If this story hit you in the chest, if you felt something watching these 2 titans go from enemies to rivals to something that looks a lot like brotherhood, then do me a favor and subscribe to this channel. Hit that button. We tell stories like this every week, stories about the moments that turned ordinary people into legends, and legends into something eternal. Now let me finish this. Here's where I land on the whole thing. You can talk about Arnold's 7 Mr. Olympia titles. You can talk about Stallone's Oscar nominations. You can stack up their box office numbers, their franchises, their cultural impact, all of it. But if you want to understand who these men really are, skip the highlights reel and go back to that party in Santa Monica. Go back to that folding table with the buckled legs and the scattered cold cuts. Because at that table, before the fame, before the money, before any of it, two men showed each other exactly what they were made of. Arnold showed his power. Stallone showed his refusal to break. And neither one of them ever forgot what the other one brought that night. There's a gym in Venice Beach, not Gold's, a smaller place, no sign out front, where an old black and white photo hangs on the wall near the water fountain. It shows two young men standing next to a destroyed folding table, both of them holding beers, both of them with forearms so pumped they look ready to split. One of them is grinning for the camera. The other is looking at the first one with a sideways expression that sits right on the border between respect and a dare. Nobody knows who took the photo. Nobody remembers it being taken. But it's there, and every once in a while, somebody new walks into that gym, sees the picture and asks, "What happened to the table?" The answer is always the same. Two guys happened to it. Stallone, years later, was asked in an interview about his rivalry with Arnold. He talked about the movies, the competition, the decades of going back and forth. But then the interviewer asked about the arm wrestling story. Stallone got quiet. He looked down at his hands for a moment, those same hands that had written Rocky on a stack of notebook paper, that had pounded heavy bags until his knuckles split, that had locked fingers with the biggest man in Hollywood and refused to yield. He said 5 words. He made me want more. That's it. That's the whole thing. Not anger, not jealousy, not bitterness. Just a simple acknowledgement that being in the presence of someone who is exactly as hungry as you are, exactly as stubborn as you are, exactly as unwilling to back down as you are, that is the thing that pushes you past every limit you thought you had. Arnold, for his part, has told a version of this story in various interviews over the years. The details shift. Sometimes the table breaks in the first 30 seconds. Sometimes the match lasts an hour. Sometimes there are 50 people watching, sometimes 10. But one detail never changes, no matter who asks or when. Arnold always says the same thing about Stallone. His grip. I never forgot his grip. From a man who shook hands with presidents, who held trophies over his head in front of thousands, who wrapped his fingers around prop swords and movie guns and the steering wheels of tanks, the thing he remembered most was the grip of a broke actor who sat down at a table and wouldn't let go. That's the legend. That's the real one. Not the table breaking. Not the muscles or the veins or the crowd. The legend is two men who grabbed onto each other and onto their own futures and held on until something had to give. The table gave. They never did. Santa Monica, mid-1970s. A party nobody important was supposed to be at. A table that cost $20 and lasted 20 minutes. And two men who cost nothing and lasted forever. The table didn't survive. But the story did. And now you've got it, the same way it's been passed around locker rooms and movie sets and late-night bar conversations for 50 years. Two guys, one table, no winner, no loser. Just a moment so raw, so real, and so perfectly matched that it became the foundation of the greatest rivalry Hollywood has ever seen. They broke the table, and then they broke every box office record that mattered. And if you go back far enough, past the mansions and the Oscars and the gubernatorial mansion and the franchise deals, all of it starts with two forearms locked together over a pile of cold cuts. Two men who looked across a cheap table and saw in each other the only thing they ever truly needed. Competition. That's not a rivalry. That's a gift. And the table? The table was just the altar where two legends were born.